Have you ever reached climax, but nothing came out, and in that quiet moment afterward, a single thought hit you hard? What is happening to my body? I want you to hear this carefully because I've seen this moment stop men in their tracks. Many of them sit across from me, lower their voice, and ask a question they've been carrying alone for months, sometimes years. They're not just worried about sex. They're worried this might mean something is breaking inside them, something serious, something irreversible. And here's what makes this even more unsettling. In some cases, this change is harmless. In others, it's the body whispering a warning long before pain, long before diagnosis, long before anyone else notices. The problem is most men don't know which one they're facing, so they stay silent, hoping it will go away. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here because I've listened to too many men who waited too long, and I've also watched the relief on the faces of those who understood what was really happening and realized they were not losing their masculinity, their desire, or their future. In the next few minutes, I'm going to explain what this change truly means, why it happens, and most importantly, how to tell when it's safe and when it's time to act before fear runs too far ahead of facts. This is the first thing I always slow my patients down to understand. Many men come to me convinced that climax and ejaculation are the same event, one switch, one outcome. But inside the body, they are actually two very different systems working together, and sometimes one keeps going even when the other quietly changes. I often explain it like this. Think of orgasm as the electrical signal. It comes from the brain and nerves. Ejaculation is the mechanical delivery system, muscles, ducts, and glands working in sequence. You can feel the electricity even if the delivery doesn't happen the way it used to. And that distinction alone immediately relieves a lot of panic. Because feeling pleasure does not mean the system is broken. It means part of it is still very much alive. Clinically, this matters. Studies show that as men age, the coordination between nerves and muscles becomes less precise. Blood flow changes, medications interfere, surgical history plays a role. In fact, research published in urology journals suggests that a noticeable reduction in ejaculate volume affects a large percentage of men over 60, many of whom are otherwise healthy and sexually active. Yet no one warned them this could happen, so when it does, fear fills in the silence. What I tell my patients is this: the body doesn't suddenly fail, it adapts. Sometimes that adaptation is harmless, sometimes it's a clue, and the mistake many men make is assuming the worst without understanding the mechanism first. Because once you understand how ejaculation normally works, it becomes much easier to understand why it changes, and more importantly, which specific change deserves your attention next. The first thing I notice when men sit across from me is not physical pain, it's fear. Fear that something essential has stopped working, fear that this moment means aging has finally taken something away for good. And almost always that fear comes from one misunderstanding, the belief that orgasm and ejaculation are the exact same thing. So I slow the conversation down. I tell them this in plain language. Orgasm is a signal. Ejaculation is a process. One is controlled by the brain and nerves, the other by muscles, valves, and glands that have to fire in a very precise order. And when that order changes even slightly, the experience can look different even though pleasure is still there. And that difference alone explains far more than most men realize. I've seen this repeatedly in my practice. Men who are still healthy, still interested, still capable of intimacy. Once men understand that orgasm and ejaculation are not the same thing, the next question almost always comes fast and quiet. So, what exactly is happening to me? This is where the term dry ejaculation enters the conversation, and I'm careful with it because the name alone can sound frightening. Dry ejaculation doesn't mean desire is gone, and it doesn't mean pleasure has disappeared. It simply means that during climax, little to no semen exits the body, even though the sensation of orgasm is still there. I've had patients describe it in the same way again and again. They say it feels like reaching the end of a sentence, but the last word never comes out. That missing moment is what triggers panic. But medically, what's happening is often mechanical, not catastrophic. The nerves fire. The brain sends the signal. But the fluid that normally makes up 60 to 70% of ejaculate either isn't being released forward or isn't being produced in the same way it once was. From a clinical standpoint, this is far more common than most men realize. Urology research shows that changes in ejaculate volume increase significantly with age, especially after 60, and especially in men who take prostate medications, blood pressure drugs, or who've had pelvic procedures. Yet because no one talks about it openly the first time it happens, feels isolating, like something has suddenly gone very wrong. This is the moment I see relief begin to replace fear. Because when men realize this change has a name, a mechanism, and an explanation, they stop blaming themselves. But here's the critical part. Not all dry ejaculation is the same, and understanding why it's happening is what determines whether it's harmless or something you should never ignore. This is where the conversation usually takes a sharper turn. After men understand what dry ejaculation is, they lean in and ask me the question that really matters. Where did it go? And this is when I explain one of the most common and most misunderstood causes I see in my clinic. In many cases, the semen doesn't disappear. It simply travels in the wrong direction. Medically, this is called retrograde ejaculation, and I see it far more often than most men realize. Instead of semen being pushed out through the urethra, the internal valve at the base of the bladder doesn't close tightly enough, so the fluid flows backward into the bladder. The orgasm still happens. The muscles still contract, but the exit changes. I often use a simple comparison with my patients. Imagine a one-way door that's supposed to close during ejaculation. When that door weakens because of age surgery, diabetes-related nerve damage, or certain prostate and blood pressure medications, the pressure takes the path of least resistance. The body isn't failing. The plumbing is just misdirected. Clinically, this explains why so many men notice cloudy urine after climax, or why semen volume suddenly drops to zero overnight. Studies estimate that retrograde ejaculation affects a significant percentage of men after prostate procedures, and up to 20-30% of men taking specific alpha blocker medications. And yet, almost no one warns them this could happen. So the first experience feels shocking, even though it's often physically harmless. But here's the part I'm always careful to emphasize. While retrograde ejaculation itself is not dangerous, the reason it happens matters. Because sometimes it's a medication side effect, and sometimes it's a signal that nerve control is being compromised. And that distinction is exactly what determines whether this is something you simply manage or something you need to investigate further. After we talk about retrograde ejaculation, there's usually a pause, and then another concern surfaces. Some men tell me the change didn't happen overnight. The volume slowly faded. Month by month, it became thinner, weaker, until one day it felt like almost nothing was there. That pattern points to a different mechanism altogether. This is when I explain the role of the seminal vesicles. Most people don't realize that these small glands produce about 60 to 70% of semen volume. They're not optional. They're the reservoir. And when they're blocked, inflamed, or scarred, the body can still generate orgasm, but the fluid simply can't join the exit. I've seen this in men with a history they barely remember, a prostate infection years ago, pelvic inflammation that cleared up, even minor procedures that healed on the surface but left internal scarring behind. Over time, those narrow ducts stiffen or close like a garden hose that's been kinked too many times. The signal fires, the muscles contract, but the reservoir never empties. From a medical standpoint, this matters more than people think. Imaging studies and urology data show that partial or complete obstruction of the seminal vesicles is a recognized cause of low or absent ejaculate, especially in older men. And unlike retrograde ejaculation, this isn't about direction, it's about access. The fluid is there, but it's trapped. This is often the moment when fear spikes again. Men worry this means permanent damage. But here's the key distinction. I make obstruction doesn't automatically mean loss. It means something physical is in the way, and physical problems can often be evaluated, managed, or treated once they're identified. The danger isn't the blockage itself. The danger is assuming nothing can be done and never checking. Because the next question, and it's the one that truly changes the conversation, is whether this blockage is purely mechanical or whether the body's chemistry is quietly shifting in a way that affects semen production at its source. At this point in the conversation, many men assume the issue must be plumbing valves, ducts blockages, but sometimes the change isn't mechanical at all. It's chemical. And this is where I see confusion turn into clarity. Because semen production doesn't just depend on structures, it depends on signals, especially hormones. I explain it this way to my patients. Testosterone isn't only about desire or erections. It's one of the key messengers that tells the reproductive system how much fluid to produce, how responsive the glands should be, and how strongly everything contracts at climax. When that signal fades, the experience can still happen, but with less force, less volume, and sometimes almost nothing visible at all. Clinically, this pattern is common. Large population studies show that total testosterone levels decline gradually, with age often dropping 1 to 2% per year after midlife. By the time men reach their 60s, many are operating with significantly lower levels than they realize. And what surprises them is this dry or reduced ejaculation can appear before classic symptoms like fatigue or low libido become obvious. I've had men tell me, I still want intimacy. I still feel the climax, but something feels thinner, weaker, unfinished. That description matters because it points away from blockage and toward production. When hormone signaling drops, the seminal vesicles and prostate don't shut down, they simply scale back, quietly, gradually, without warning. This is also why quick assumptions can be dangerous. Low semen volume doesn't automatically mean aging has won. It means the body's messaging system may be changing, and chemistry can often be measured, adjusted, and supported once it's identified. The mistake is ignoring it because it feels embarrassing to talk about. And this brings us to the most important turning point of all, how to recognize when dry ejaculation is simply a manageable change, and when it's the kind of signal that should never be dismissed. This is the part of the conversation where my tone changes slightly, not to frighten, but to sharpen attention, because while many causes of dry ejaculation are manageable, there are moments when this symptom stops being just a change and starts being a warning. And I've learned through patience exactly which signal should never be brushed aside. I tell men this very clearly. When dry ejaculation appears suddenly without medication, changes without surgery, without a gradual pattern, that's when I pause. Especially if it comes with other quiet signs, new pelvic pain, burning, blood in the urine, or semen unexplained weight loss, or numbness and weakness that weren't there before. These combinations matter. They tell a story the body is trying to speak. From a medical standpoint, this is where we look deeper. Certain prostate, bladder, or testicular cancers can interfere with ejaculation pathways long before they cause obvious pain. Neurological conditions, including advanced diabetes, spinal nerve compression, Parkinson's disease, or multiple sclerosis, can disrupt the nerve signals that control ejaculation while leaving erections and orgasm relatively intact at first. Studies consistently show that sexual changes are often among the earliest signs of these conditions, not the last. What I've seen, and this is important, is that men rarely connect these dots on their own. They wait, they hope, they assume it's age, and sometimes that delay costs valuable time. Not because dry ejaculation itself is dangerous, but because it can be one of the earliest clues that something deeper needs attention. Here's the reassurance I always give. Noticing a red flag does not mean the worst is happening. It means you've been given an opportunity to check early when answers are clearer and options are wider. The real risk isn't the symptom. The real risk is silence. And this naturally leads to the next question every man asks me after hearing this. If I notice these changes, what should I actually do? And how do I take back control instead of just worrying? By the time we reach this point, the medical questions are clearer, but the emotional ones are often heavier. This is where many men stop asking about biology and start questioning themselves. I see it in their posture, in the way their voice drops. They don't say it directly, but the fear is obvious. Does this mean I'm less of a man? I want to be very clear about this because I've heard it too many times. Dry ejaculation doesn't just affect the body, it quietly attacks confidence. Men tell me they begin to avoid intimacy, not because they don't want closeness, but because they don't want to explain. They worry their partner will notice. They worry they'll be judged. And so they choose silence, thinking it's protection. In reality, it often creates distance instead. What's striking is how common this is. Research on male sexual health shows that emotional stress and perceived loss of masculinity can amplify sexual symptoms even when the physical cause is stable. In other words, the mind can make the body feel worse. I've watched relationships strain, not because of dry ejaculation itself, but because no one talked about it. Fear filled the gaps where communication should have been. This is where the shift begins. When men understand that masculinity isn't measured in fluid performance or volume, but in awareness and responsibility, the pressure eases. I've seen partners become more connected, not less, once the conversation finally happens. What felt like a personal failure turns into a shared challenge, and that changes everything. But emotional understanding alone isn't enough. The next step is practical. Once you let go of shame, the real question becomes what actions actually help and which ones quietly make things worse over time. This is the moment I see relief replace confusion, because now the question shifts from what's wrong with me to what can I actually do? And the answer is more practical and more hopeful than most men expect. I start by grounding expectations. There is no single pill that fixes every cause of dry ejaculation because the causes are different, but there are clear steps that consistently make a difference. The first is awareness. When men review their medications with me, especially prostate drugs, blood pressure medications, or diabetes treatments, we often find contributors that can be adjusted time differently or replaced under medical guidance. Small changes here can restore function or at least prevent progression. Lifestyle matters more than people think. Blood flow, nerve health, and hormone signaling all respond to sleep, movement, and metabolic control. Studies repeatedly show that better glucose control in diabetes, regular moderate exercise, and adequate sleep improve nerve signaling and sexual function over time. I tell my patients to think of it like maintaining wiring and plumbing at the same time. Ignore either one and the system struggles. Then there's communication. When men stop carrying this alone, when they talk openly with their partner or their doctor, outcomes improve, not just emotionally, but medically. Symptoms are addressed earlier. Options are wider. In anxiety, which quietly worsens, sexual function finally loosens its grip. The most important step is this: don't guess. Testing exists. Hormones can be measured, nerve function can be assessed, imaging can clarify blockages. Once you replace fear with information, you regain control, and control is where confidence starts to return. And that brings us to the final piece, the perspective that changes how men see this experience entirely and why this moment does not have to define the rest of their life. This is the moment I see something change, not in the body, but in the way a man sees himself. After all the explanations, the scans, the causes, one question quietly rises to the surface. So, what does this say about me? And this is where I slow the conversation down again, because the story many men tell themselves is far harsher than the medical reality. I tell them this plainly: masculinity was never meant to be measured in volume, force, or good. It was never meant to disappear because the body aged or adapted. What I've learned from listening to hundreds of men is that the real damage doesn't come from dry ejaculation. It comes from the meaning men attach to it in silence. They assume it means weakness, failure, loss of worth, and none of that is medically true. In fact, the men who do best are the ones who reframe this moment. They stop asking, "What did I lose?" and start asking, "What is my body asking for right now?" That shift matters. Research in men's health consistently shows that acceptance and proactive care reduce anxiety, improve sexual confidence, and even improve physical outcomes over time. When shame loosens its grip, the nervous system responds differently. Desire feels safer. Intimacy feels possible again. I've watched relationships heal at this stage, not because semen returned, but because honesty did. Partners lean closer instead of pulling away. Conversations become calmer, and the pressure that once made everything feel fragile finally starts to lift. This is where men realize they are not broken. They are adapting, learning, and choosing to stay engaged with their health. And once a man truly understands this, the question is no longer, "What did I lose?" It becomes, "What kind of future do I want to protect from here?" This is often the quiet turning point, the moment men stop seeing this experience as an ending and start recognizing it as a signal. I've heard patients say, almost in surprise, "If this hadn't happened, I never would have checked anything." And they're right. Changes like dry ejaculation don't arrive to punish the body. They arrive to get attention. From a clinical perspective, this is where outcomes truly diverge. Men who act at this moment, who test, ask questions, adjust habits, and follow up tend to do better over time. Not just sexually, but metabolically, hormonally, and emotionally. Studies in men's health consistently show that early engagement leads to better control of blood sugar, improved nerve function, more stable hormone profiles, and lower anxiety around intimacy. Information replaces fear, and fear is what quietly does the most damage. I explain it to my patients this way. Think of this as a dashboard light, not an engine failure. The light doesn't mean the car is done. It means you still have time to protect it. When men use this moment to review medications, check hormones, address sleep and movement, and reconnect with their partner, something unexpected happens. Confidence begins to return. Not because everything goes back to how it was, but because control comes back. This is also where perspective shifts. Instead of shrinking their world to one symptom, men begin to expand it to their future, longevity, connection, quality of life. What once felt embarrassing becomes the reason they took action earlier than they otherwise would have. And that's why this matters so much, because this moment doesn't have to define what you've lost. It can define what you chose to protect next. And that realization is exactly what opens the door to the final message I want to leave you with. Before we end, I want to leave you with one clear thought. Changes in male sexual health, including dry ejaculation, are far more common than most men realize, and they are not a verdict on your masculinity. What they really are signals. Signals that your body is changing, adapting, and asking for attention. When you understand what's happening and respond early, you protect not just sexual function, but confidence, relationships, and long-term quality of life. If this video helped you make sense of something you've been quietly worried about, please save it. Save it for yourself or for a moment when someone you care about needs reassurance and clear information. And if you want honest, practical medical guidance about male physiology and men's health explained without fear or judgment, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. I regularly share updated medical insights designed to help you stay informed and proactive. Before you go, I'd like to hear from you. Have you noticed changes like these yourself? Or do you have questions you've never felt comfortable asking? Leave a comment below. You're not alone, and these conversations matter. Remember this understanding: your body is not a weakness, it's a form of strength. And taking care of your health today is one of the most powerful investments you can make in your future.